Parlamentar sobre o metano. Informamos ainda que em cada painel, os participantes da reunião poderão fazer uso da palavra. Para isso, pedimos que façam inscrição na mesa localizada na parte de trás do auditório até o final de cada sessão.
Back part of the auditorium. Part of the panel, Mr. Rich Lesnick, Director of Fixed Income Sustainable and moderator of this panel. Mr. Henrique Bezerra, Regional Leader for Latin America of Global Methane Hub, and Juan Pablo Letelier of the Parliamentary Platform on Climate Action Against Methane.
Com a palavra, o senhor Mitch Resnick irá mediar esta sessão e realizar o lançamento do Guia Global dos Parlamentares sobre mudanças climáticas e soluções
local guide of parliamentarians about climate solutions.
Distinguished parliamentarians, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a privilege to join you today at the parliamentary meeting at COP30 for the official launch of the Parliamentarians' Global Guide to Climate Change and Climate Solutions, which there's hard copies around. This publication is a product of the collaboration between the University of Exeter, Arizona State University, and the Interparliamentary Union. It provides clear, evidence-based insights to help translate international climate ambition into national action, and is specially designed for parliamentarians. The guide draws on leading global expertise from climate science and biodiversity to energy and finance. It brings together contributions from world-class researchers, policy thinkers, to support science-informed legislation and oversight. It also includes a powerful youth forward, a reminder that climate policy is also a question of intergenerational justice. Young people are calling not only for ambition, but for accountability. Each chapter provides practical direction, how to reform subsidies, mobilize finance, strengthen adaptation, protect biodiversity, and ensure justice and inclusive transitions. The message is clear. Parliamentarians are central to every aspect of climate action and progress. As the parliamentarians, you are invited to use the guide as a tool to support you as you carry out your parliamentary work. This guide will help give you insights on how to better scrutinize budgets through a climate lens, how to better align laws and investments with the Paris Agreement. Parliamentary action is how global agreements turn into real progress on the ground, and we hope this guide helps facilitate this. A link to the publication is available on the IPU website, and some copies of the publication will be available later. On a personal note and off script, as a former student of international affairs and as a believer in international institutions, it is for me a great honor to participate in these proceedings. To see this also gives me great hope when there is so much pressure placed on multilateralism at present. Furthermore, I encourage you to adhere to the guidance and the 3 steps on methane abatement in order to mobilize and scale up private capital to address the climate crisis. Sound, thoughtful rules and regulation can be a profound lever of change. The certainty and visibility it creates is a catalyst to crowd in climate finance, which is an objective of mine as a sustainability investor. Thank you. Now we will begin the panel discussion. Good afternoon, distinguished parliamentarians, guests, and colleagues again. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this session titled Non-CO2 Gases in Focus, Parliamentary Action on Methane, held as part of this parliamentary meeting, COP30. Today's discussion is timely as it takes place during COP30's thematic focus on non-CO2 greenhouse gases, a topic that goes to the heart of achieving near-term climate impact. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, far more harmful than carbon dioxide, while it's in the atmosphere, even though it lasts for only about a decade. It is already responsible for roughly 1/3 of the warming the world is experiencing today. Cutting methane emissions now offers one of the fastest and most affordable ways to slow global warming, while also improving air quality, public health, and food security. This session forms part of a broader initiative by the Inter-Parliamentary Union, supported by the Global Methane Hub, to build the capacity of parliaments and strengthen their role in reducing methane emissions. Through this partnership, the IPU is helping parliaments around the world translate global methane commitments into national legislative and oversight action. That is something that is of interest to you, and again, I personally hope it is. Your parliament, to you and your parliament, please speak to Holly Schofield from the IPU Secretariat today. Let's begin by setting the scene with a short video that introduces methane, where it comes from, why reducing it is such a powerful lever for climate action. And we'll cue the video from the tech team, please. Today's session will explore how parliaments can help drive this change through legislation, oversight, and budgetary powers, ensuring that commitments on methane reduction are translated into real results at the national level. We are joined today by Enrique Becerra from the Global Methane Hub, an organization that has been at the forefront of mobilizing global action and partnerships to achieve deep, rapid cuts in methane emissions, and by two distinguished parliamentarians, Mr. Juan Lablo Letelier from Parliamentary Platform for Climate Action Against Methane in Chile, and by video link, Honorable Kiere Dua Dixon from Ghana, who will share they will share their experiences and insights on how parliaments can accelerate methane reduction. These comments will be followed by the launch of the formal guidance by Holly Schofield to my left. After these presentations, we'll open the floor. If you'd like to speak, please ensure you have submitted a request to take the floor form to the IPU Secretariat. So to set the scene, I'd like to invite Mr. Enrique Becerra to take the floor and share his remarks to help set the frame for today's discussions. Mr. Becerra, the floor is yours.
There you go. Yeah, thank you very much, Mitch, for the introduction. And it's an honor to be part of this panel with my peer panelists. Also like to thank the Legislative Assembly of the State of Pará for hosting us, and the IPU for this very important partnership, and especially Juan Pablo Letelier for the very important partnership and his work in bringing the methane agenda and raising the methane agenda in key parliaments of Latin America. And of course, all of you honored parliamentarians representing countries from all over the world. So some of the key figures and overview of what methane emissions mean for the climate were already mentioned, but I'd like to reiterate the numbers so that we're all aligned on the importance of addressing this major climate and development issues. So, as was said, methane is responsible for at least a third of the climate warming and the climate crisis we're all living. It is 86 times stronger as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is responsible for 50% of current warming. But contrary to carbon dioxide that stays in the atmosphere for centuries, methane and other superpollutant, short-lived climate superpollutants stay only a few years. In the case of methane, we're talking about 12 to 20 years max that it stays in the atmosphere. What it means is that if we mitigate methane emissions now, in the next 1 or 2 decades, we already notice the impact of this mitigation on the climate crisis. In a moment where, unfortunately, and a lot due to the slow action on carbon dioxide mitigation, which is and will still be a major priority, we are now at 1.5C above pre-industrial levels. There is, according to the latest IPCC report, which was published 4 or 5 years ago, there is no possible scenario for us to stay within the Paris Agreement, and that is from 1.5 to 2. If we don't also prioritize, together with decarbonization, the demethanization of our economy. And we are now entering a new territory. We're now officially overshooting the goal of the Paris Agreement of staying well below 1.5, right? And so that's why we need to mitigate methane emissions, because it will serve as an emergency brake to the climate crisis. That's why we have this campaign of pulling the emergency brake on the climate crisis. And how is methane emissions distributed in our economy? So a third of it comes from, 40% of it comes from agriculture. More than a third of it comes from the energy system, mainly fossil fuels, and 20% comes from waste. And of course, recognizing this major challenge, but also the opportunity that we have in hand, now I believe 158 countries have pledged to lower global methane emissions by 30% in 2030 from 2020 levels. This was first signed in COP26 in Glasgow. Most of the Global South countries are signatories of that. And unfortunately, as was recently released by UNEP, we are nowhere close to that target. The same is true, of course, for carbon dioxide emissions. So that's why we really have to engage in this agenda, and I believe parliaments hold a key responsibility on making sure that we have the right policies implemented so that our respective countries collectively contribute to this target. If we reach this target of lowering methane emissions by 30% in 2030, that will mean that we will avoid 0.3 Celsius of warming already by 2050. 0.3 is a lot in terms of climate disaster and loss and damage, which will affect especially developing countries, as we here all know very well. But how to do that, right? So first I'm going to briefly talk about agriculture, and then I'll move on to energy and to waste, which are the areas that right now I believe parliaments can do more to mitigate. But methane is responsible for 40% of emissions, and it is the sector where the cost effectiveness of methane mitigation is the lowest. But when we talk about methane mitigation in livestock and in rice cultivation, which are the two sectors that emit methane in agriculture, especially when we're referring to global south countries, to developing countries, what we are talking about really is to increase productivity from livestock through technologies like better grazing management, better nutrition for animals. We're talking about resiliency from extreme weather events. We're talking about rice producing systems using less water which of course this in a changing, fast-changing climate is a resiliency issue for farmers. All of these measures will increase productivity. So we're not talking about lowering livestock heads for countries like Brazil, Ethiopia, or wherever. We are really talking about how to increase productivity so that the methane intensity of the kilo of meat or the kilo of dairy that is produced is lower. Because we recognize that in the Global South, animal protein consumption will likely increase for the coming decades. That it's a different story for Global North countries. When we're talking about Global North countries, yes, we are talking about lowering their total methane emissions from agriculture because they are already at a very high per capita level. There we are talking about more advanced and expensive measures like vaccines, like feed additives. So I really want to set this straight because usually in countries like Brazil, when we talk about methane mitigation in livestock, people, oh, you want to kill our cows. No, we don't want to kill your cows. We want you to be more productive. That has other side benefits because you lower demand for land, so you don't have incentives for deforestation, which, for instance, in the state of Pará and in Brazilian Amazon, it's an important issue to be addressed. Pará, by the way, is a key partner in this agenda. We have projects with smallholder farmers here in the southeast of Pará that will increase the productivity through better grazing management, better animal health, and better genetic selection of cattle so that you increase the productivity and lower their methane emissions. We also, I should say, in the state of Pará, I will save it for when I talk about waste. But so let's move on to the energy sector, which is the second biggest contributor to methane emissions, more than a third of methane emissions. And here, parliaments play a key role. And I'm not counting the time, so let me know if I'm speaking too much. First, countries need to regulate the methane emissions from their fossil fuel sectors. First, by passing legislation that will ban all flaring and venting of methane, which, you know, when you see oil platforms onshore and offshore, you see these flares. These flares are gas that it's being burned. Of course, you will need some emergency flarings, but most of that with current technology at low cost, it's completely mitigatable. Also, I should say that differently from agriculture, more than 50% of the mitigation in the fossil fuel sector is cost negative. How is that possible? First, what we were talking about is to stop the leakage of the products that the industry is selling. So if you stop the leakage, you have more product to sell. So the mitigation of methane emissions pays for itself. Not in every case, but in almost half of the mitigation. And this is based on IEA's figures from last year. But also, 75% of the total emissions of the fossil fuel sector has a cost of lower than $20 per ton, which in carbon markets is very low. So really we have the technologies at low cost to mitigate 75% of methane emissions from the energy sector. What we don't have is legislation. What we have right now is voluntary commitments, especially from international oil companies. There are some national oil companies like Petrobras, Ecopetrol, but we don't have a lot of regulation. There are some very notable and honorable exceptions like Nigeria, who is leading methane mitigation in the oil and gas sector in Africa. We have countries like Colombia in South America who are leading regulation and implementation. I just left a very nice conversation at the Nigerian pavilion, and they were talking about the challenges and the opportunities to implement their regulation, and they're really working very hard. There is a common challenge, which is finance, and this is a challenge especially for highly indebted national oil companies who not only are highly indebted, but the royalties are the main source of revenues for their government. So finance is a key issue, but we are working to make sure that multilateral development banks, but especially the private sector, has the financial instruments and infrastructure to mitigate these emissions, as they are very low cost and they have a very high benefit in terms of carbon mitigated, as I just alluded to. And now, last but not least, and I saved waste for last because here is where, and coming from Brazil, it's the place where I believe parliaments, not more than energy, but as much as energy, have so much to do. When you have regulation in place to make sure that people segregate their waste, and you have segregated waste collection systems in place, when you make sure that there are payments for services for waste pickers, and you have policies to build capacity among waste pickers, which have always been the protagonists of the circular economy. When you look at the Global South, but this is also true in many Global North countries, but particularly in the Global South, who is doing the recycling? Who is actually doing the separation of the waste? Unfortunately, it's not people in their homes, it's not companies, it's the waste pickers who are doing that, but they are not getting properly paid. Brazil is leading this agenda. We have recently inaugurated the first composting facility for the organic waste generated at a COP that it's being managed by waste pickers here in Belém. We have a number of initiatives in Brazil and in Latin America where it's not about inclusion, it's about recognition of the protagonism that waste pickers play. And this is an area where, of course, parliaments have a lot a lot of a responsibility, and it's a great opportunity for you to act on. There are other things like promoting biogas and biomethane. Also, I should say, even before talking about composting, the parliaments should regulate and promote food loss and waste prevention. There are a number of initiatives all over the world, but again, I will say Brazil that, and some even European countries like Spain, who passed regulation to penalize food corporations and supermarkets and restaurants that produce a lot of organic waste. So you can give tax incentives for those that don't waste so much food. You can also create incentives for supermarkets to donate the food that is still good for human consumption for social projects. This is a way for you to combat hunger. You know, this is a big agenda, very important for President Lula, and you are combating hunger, but you're also combating methane emissions, because that food that didn't go to waste will not become methane. Also, it's very important that countries prohibit and hold parliaments prohibit and hold governments accountable for dump sites. We know that open dump sites burning is a major issue for air quality. If you look at the health impacts of this of dump sites fires, but also fossil fuels methane burning, it's huge. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of deaths, of avoidable deaths every year because of air pollution. So it's just not about the climate, it's also about social justice, it's also about air quality. So I'll stop here, but really the final message that I want to deliver to you is that methane mitigation, it's not a mitigation per se agenda. This is really an agenda of mitigation and development, and through development, because we are talking about agricultural productivity and climate resiliency for farmers. We're talking about better paying jobs and more dignified jobs and more circular economy in the waste sector. And we were talking about an energy system that is not wasteful, that is efficient, and also we have to always prioritize energy transition. This should be a focus. But while we are not in a completely fossil fuel free world, we need to make sure that we don't waste this resource, while also we destroy our climate system. So thank you very much, and we really count on the parliaments of the world to pull the emergency brake on the climate crisis. You should prioritize methane emissions mitigation as much as we should prioritize carbon dioxide. So thank you very much for your attention and for this space.
So, Enrique, thank you very much for setting the scene here, but I want to unpack a couple of points here that are very important. The first is that methane reduction, as per your comments, can be self-reinforcing to the value that the product is producing itself by, for example, reducing flaring. and reducing waste. But also, particularly important as we look at COP30, how inexorably linked climate is to social stress and biodiversity, and that when solving one problem, there are constructive effects in other areas that affect society and nature. And finally, to unlock all of that, how important legislatures are in creating the regulation to streamline and open up finance and ability to make these kinds of things happen. So thank you for those comments. We'll now turn to two parliamentary perspectives, beginning with Mr. Juan Pablo Letelier. Mr. Letelier has been a strong voice and a strong advocate in addressing the climate crisis following a long and distinguished career in the legislature in Chile. Over to you.
I see. Thank you very much, Mitch. I want to greet everyone who is present. I want to thank the authorities of the state of and of the city of Belém that have us here in this facility. And allow me to be a bit abrupt. We are not on track. We are 100% off track of what the Paris Agreement said. Governments with the United Nations Framework Convention are not going to avoid a tremendous crisis. Governments alone are incapable of avoiding the disaster. I would like it not to be that way. But the scientific facts and politicians, we need to do actions on scientific facts, not on what we want, not of what we think, but what is. And we know that the law is that which allows, prohibits, or permits. That is our instrument. Lawmakers can change conducts. Nobody else will do it. And governments alone, allow me to say it, 10 years ago said we are going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the only thing they talked about for many years was of CO2. Not other gases, only CO2. And all of us have heard of carbon neutrality, electromobility, and to be neutral in carbon emissions by 2050. And that's what we've been told. But the facts are that in some parts of the world, of the atmosphere, we are way beyond 1.6 degrees of heating. Way beyond. And each of us have seen extreme weather phenomena. We know climate change is here. Mr. Trump can say something else. Maybe he lives somewhere else. But on the earth, the problems are severe. So I want to underline this. We are the only species on Earth who destroys its habitat. There's no other species. And as we go, and we know what our children are saying, they don't want to have children. Why? Because they know that the expectation of the planet is not good. They are perhaps wiser than we are. What I want to say is that 5 years ago, the scientific community told us we have a chance. We have a chance if we reduce methane emissions. It is the emergency brake. It will not save us, but it can give us time. The time we don't have. The time governments are not giving us. Only $108 governments presented the NDCs at this COP meeting? Barely a half. Barely a half. What do we know about methane? As Enrique told us, methane captures 80 times more heat than CO2. That means that solar radiation that comes into the planet, methane limits the amount of energy which goes out very strongly. It is worse than CO2. And forgive me for what I'm going to say, I don't want to be politically incorrect. We cannot blame the rich countries for methane emissions. We can't do that. Gas and oil, waste management, agriculture. The majority of the agriculture is in the global south. The majority of the gas and oil is not in the north, or at least it's distributed evenly. And on waste management, it's our problem in the global south. We still have open sky trash all over. What do we want to do? What are we proposing? Members of Parliament, do your work. Members of Parliament, you have to promote laws to change conducts. Don't wait for your governments. Don't wait for others to do it. Start doing our work. And how? Promoting laws in two areas. Someone here said, the distinguished representative of Kenya, in the morning, he said, governments never ask parliaments about NDCs. That is true. I really respect what United Nations say. They say, well, you should control your government in what they say to the NDCs. But governments never inform parliaments of the NDCs. They never talk with parliaments of what their commitments really are. The first thing we need to do is make sure that governments present the NDCs to Parliament. Make it an obligation, perhaps not that we approve them, but yes, that they inform us. That is a law members of Parliament can present. You do not need government's authority for that. Secondly, that there be methane targets in NDCs. That in every NDC, our countries establish a methane target. A little higher, a little lower, but a target. And thirdly, in our climate change laws, establish methane targets. The first thing is general laws, very simple, but to get this on the table. And regarding the sources of methane emissions, in agriculture, nobody's saying that we won't eat cows. Nobody's against cattle growing. We need, in the world, we still need more protein. There are many people who still haven't had access to the degrees of the amount of protein they need. So we will need meat for a long time and dairy products for a long time. But we can do cattle growing or herding without producing so much methane. It's very easy. Different techniques of grazing, food supplements. And whoever has had any experience regarding livestock, all livestock is given food supplements. All of it. And it is not expensive. Today, it is cost efficient. In the waste management, we know that there's a tremendous industry. Waste are resources. It's not as if you can't do anything with organic waste. Organic waste produces energy. but we need to have control of what we're doing with waste. What is our proposal? Very basic. In all our countries, to promote a system of monitoring, reporting, and verification of what happens with methane emissions in the gas and oil industry, what happens in the agricultural sector, and what happens in the waste sector. For what? To have data, information. Let me say and remind something. 1/3 of food production in the world ends up in the trash. We destroy much of the food we produce. It ends up as trash in the waste dumps, producing methane. Something we have not said here till now, now we'll try to close with this. We can't see methane. We can't smell methane. It doesn't have color, it doesn't have odor. But what is methane? It's natural gas. It's gas. But what it does to our health is tremendous. Methane, as it is emitted into the atmosphere, produces something which is called tropospheric ozone. It is responsible for 50% of respiratory diseases, respiratory sicknesses. Our health ministries spend very much money on respiratory diseases because of methane emissions. I want to finish saying members of parliament can do something, and what we are inviting them to do is to do their work. Our friends from the Maldives today and from Fiji told us that they are in very big problem. Ocean levels are increasing. They don't have a place to go. If we want to help them, let's do our work. Let's not wait for the financing. None of the laws I have suggested requires financing. None of them. All of them change conduct. All of them. I invite you to take up the banners, the flags, the challenge that we become parliamentaries for climate action and that we work in a common platform to do our job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Letelier, for that spirited contribution to this important discussion. I walk away from this understanding that we all are stakeholders in this value chain of slowing climate change, rolling back the climate crisis, we in the financial community and in the parliament as well. Your point, science doesn't care what we think, whether we agree with it or not. It's going to do its thing, and it's up to us to respond to that, hence this spirited call to action. Consideration of the NDCs in Parliament, methane targets, technology as an enabler, and techniques, monitoring, reporting, and verification. And finally, this point about climate action, constructive, positive benefits to alleviate social stress. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Honorable Kiere Dua Dixon from Ghana, who has been closely involved in Ghana's growing parliamentary engagement on this issue through collaboration with the IPU. Ghana's parliament recently hosted a national workshop focused specifically on methane, helping to identify priorities and next steps for parliamentary action. As Honorable Dixon was unable to join us here today, he has kindly sent a video message with his comments, and the team will cue that up now. Thank you.
Chairperson, distinguished parliamentarians, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I extend warm greetings from the Parliament of Ghana and the good people of my constituency, Brekum West. It is an honor to contribute to the methane session of the IPU's parliamentary meeting at the COP30. Chairperson, as the world faces increasing impacts of climate change, methane mitigation is one of the most cost-effective and the quickest ways to slow global warming. Methane accounts for about 30% of the global temperature rise since the pre-industrial era. It is a powerful greenhouse gas with a global warming potential of approximately 28 times that of carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. Chairperson, on Ghana's collaboration with the IPU on the methane project, Ghana has demonstrated strong political commitment to climate action through active collaboration with international partners, notably the Inter-Parliamentary Union, IPU. Under this partnership, Ghana's parliament has been privileged to participate in the Global Methane Project, which seeks to strengthen parliamentary engagement in the development and oversight of methane reduction actions. 2 weeks ago, Chairperson, the Speaker of Parliament of Ghana, Right Honorable Abambaben, officially launched a strategic partnership with the IPU under the project titled Enhancing Parliamentary Action on Climate Change, strengthening the role of Parliament in reducing methane emissions. This was followed by the 3-day workshop to build the capacity of members of Parliament to effectively advocate for policies and actions to address methane emissions. Following the workshop, a field visit was conducted to rice farms for parliamentarians to witness firsthand the methane emissions challenges in the cultivation and engage the farmers on the innovative local solutions to reduce methane in rice farming. Chairperson, regarding the development of Ghana's methane roadmap and the integration into the nationally determined contribution NDC 3.0, Ghana has developed a methane roadmap that identifies key sources of emissions, priority areas, and institutional responsibilities for reducing methane across main sectors of agriculture, energy, and waste management. Chairperson, the role of Parliament in this is very, very crucial. Regarding the budgetary considerations and resource allocation, Parliament of Ghana will prioritize funding for key ministries and agencies engaged in methane mitigation. Indeed, at the recent launch of a strategic partnership between the Parliament of Ghana and the IPU, the Speaker of Parliament of Ghana urged the Budget Committee to prioritize funding for climate initiatives, especially those focused on methane reduction and mitigation measures. Furthermore, to raise national awareness and encourage citizens' participation, I plan, together with the members of the Parliamentary Committee on Environment, Science and Technology, to present a formal statement on methane reduction and mitigation before the Parliament of Ghana after the COP30. Chairperson, the task before us is clear. We must move from commitment to action, from pledges to delivery. Ghana's cooperation with the IPU and other partners on the methane project shows clearly that parliamentary leadership can make a huge difference. As we gather here in Berlin at COP30, let us reaffirm our resolve to accelerate methane actions. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, distinguished colleagues.
I wish to thank Honorable Dixon for sharing Ghana's experience and his reflections on parliamentary engagement and how they can translate national commitments into concrete measures. I think excellent case studies there at the vanguard of taking action on methane. Now we will move a little bit more formally into the presentation of the IPU publication itself. I'd like to now hand the floor to Holly Schofield from the IPU Secretariat, who will briefly present the IPU's new publication, Methane Matters, 3 Steps for Parliamentary Action. I've read this along with the other document. I think they're excellent, and I look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, distinguished parliamentarians, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Holly Schofield, and I work for the IPU Secretariat, leading our global work on building parliamentary capacity to reduce methane emissions, kindly supported by the Global Methane Hub. It's a pleasure to introduce the IPU's new issue brief, Methane Matters, 3 Steps to Parliamentarians. It's a practical tool that's supposed to help parliamentarians to make informed, fair and effective action on methane, from the local level up to the global level. The guide explains what methane is, why it matters, where it comes from, and how it connects to parliamentary work. It also introduces 3 practical steps that any parliamentarian can act on, whatever the context or whatever the resources. So, step 1 is to build the evidence base. Understand where is methane coming from in your constituency, but also in your country across the waste, the agriculture, and the energy sectors. Understand what the executive has already committed to at the national and the global levels in terms of methane reductions, so that you can then hold them to account for those commitments. Step 2 talks about using the tools of Parliament to make a difference. Through oversight, through legislation, through budgeting, Parliaments can ensure that methane reduction is included in your national climate plans, that progress is monitored, and that policies are fair and that policies are fairly funded. Even small actions, asking questions, reviewing budgets, initiating hearings, these things can all help raise the profile of methane and start to drive stronger responses at the national level. And step 3 is about championing and expanding solutions. You know, as Enrico was talking about earlier, the initiatives of the waste pickers, parliaments can give visibility to these successful methane reduction initiatives, help to scale them up, and share these examples internationally so that they can inspire greater ambition. So together, these steps show that methane action, it's achievable, it's beneficial for the climate, for health, and for communities and economies. And they remind us that parliamentary leadership is essential to translate global goals into real results at the national level. There are some printed copies of this that are around. They should be outside near where you were having tea and coffee earlier on. They'll be in English and Spanish, but they're also available in other languages, French and Arabic, as well as English and Spanish, on the IPU website. So I encourage you to go on, download it, make use of it. Let us know how you're using them, how they're translating into your national context. And just finally, as a reminder, the IPU is here to support parliaments in taking stronger action on climate and on methane. If you want to learn more about how your parliament can benefit from this support, please come and speak to me. I'll be here all afternoon, and I'll be happy to talk to you more about it, give you some more information on it. So thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Holly. As I said, I've read these documents, and I think they are a proper roadmap, and together complement each other in understanding the context of the problem of methane gas, how to take actions and case studies. Clearly, parliaments have the ability to take action. It's a question of a willingness as well. We'll now open the floor for short interventions. I'm told up to 2 minutes each. And so again, I invite you to make your interventions by filling out the form. And we have 2 interventions, and I'll take those now. So the first is Mr. John Matthew of Kenya.
Thank you very much, the chair of the session, and good afternoon, colleagues. If all of us were given an opportunity to speak on this forum about our experiences about each of our countries, each of us would give an experience of how climate change has affected all of us in our different countries, from the rising lakes of Naivasha in Kenya that has displaced thousands of people, and drought that is quickly followed by floods in Zambia. And as parliamentarians, we can't fold our hands and say that there's nothing we can do, even though NDCs are domiciled at the doors of the national executives. We in Parliament have a very active role to play, especially issues to do with oversight. And that is why I'm very encouraged by the discussions that we have had this afternoon about the role of parliamentarians in ensuring that we deal with these challenges, especially on methane emission. We all appreciate the effect, the very, very disastrous effects that are caused by this methane, and there is, of course, many things that we can be able to do. And from where I sit from Kenya, the thing that I would want to pick, more specifically for Kenya and most African nations, most of our economies are driven by agriculture. And there are many things that we can be able to learn and do in ensuring that we can be able to suppress these methane emissions. Case on point, honorable colleagues, these gases are strongly linked to issues to do with agriculture, waste management, and energy. And so, therefore, we as parliamentarians should be able to do and get inventories from our ministries on how we are doing. Our committees should be able to get inventories from our ministries in terms of we get annual inventories on methane, and they are reported every year so that we're able to know the steps that we've made ahead, the steps that we have made backwards. Number two, and finally, we should be able to summon ministries to account for implementation of methane reduction projects, such as biodigesters. These are things that we should be able to do as parliamentarians. And even as we look for finances from elsewhere, many parliaments in the world, including Kenya, must appreciate the fact that budget-making process actively involves Parliament. So we should be able, therefore, to lead by example by pushing more resources. The national budgets, we should be able to move more resources so that we actually can be able to push the talk, not just talk and be able to act on some of the things that we can be able to do, honorable colleagues. We should be able to do modern landfills. We should be able to push more resources for biogas systems, livestock productive improvements. These are things that we can be able to do, and we can be able to push policies, and policies will also be followed by budgets. Maybe finally, issues to do with livestock feed programs and waste to energy facilities. Everywhere you go, in Kenya, in most nations that are represented here, you see heaps of waste everywhere in the streets, in most places, and you know that this methane is emitted from this particular waste. We should be able to push resources, we should be able to push budgets so that we are able to have this waste converted to energy. Therefore, we can be able to industrialize and do green industrialization. We can be able to create energy, we can be able to get more energy and get clean energy using resources that we have and resources that we can get from other partners. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Matthew. I think a key point there for me, highlighting an important tool, Parliament, is the budgetary process. And allocating resources in a small way can have a very big difference. We'll continue. The next speaker, I'd like to invite Ms. Karina Redder from Austria. Apologies. It's a typical mistake that an American would make, confusing Austria with Australia.
Yeah, it's no problem. Although we have no kangaroos, so that's a bit of an issue. So thank you very much for the interesting discussions we had so far. I think the issue of methane, and we talked about it before our session already with Hugh and Pablo. In Austria, it's a very controversial discussion about the topic. our national debate is often about extremes and not really, and always drifting, always in some kind of corner. And that's a big issue to really get people focused on what is actually really important. And we're talking about a very niche part of the whole problem when it comes to emissions. And then on the other side, we have the agricultural sector. In Austria, for example, they feel particularly increasingly marginalized in the discussion. So that's really an approach that is by far not what it should be. As we heard, methane is a far broader subject than just that. So I would be very interested to know, in your experience, how we can foster a more objective evidence-based dialogue, one that really takes into account the full range of considerations, because I think we really need to get, for example, farmers' associations on board with the topic. And at the moment I see there is a big rift between different groups, and we don't really recognize methane as the problem it actually is, and therefore it is not really being in focus when it comes to climate legislation. So that would be my question to our panel, because I think there's a lot of experience there that we can really learn from. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rader. I think that's an excellent point here, I guess effective parliamentary legislation is not always so simple, and that there has to be local contribution from local constituents. Would anyone like to take this question? Enrique, please, you can start, and I suppose Pablo. Yeah, okay.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I think that this is the first pillar of what the Global Methane Hub does, is exactly look at the MRV, as Juan Pablo Letelier mentioned, the measuring, reporting, or verification of where methane emissions are. And in agriculture, as you said, like, we need a evidence-based dialogue. So we need to first understand where are the emissions, how much the emissions are we talking about, depending on the sector. In terms of livestock, for instance, the emissions profile of different type of cattle, different breeds in different climates, with different diets, that's all very variables, right? So we need a scientific and evidence-based understanding of, for instance, how much methane this specific breed in Austria emits consuming this forage or consuming this type of ration, depending on if it is a grazing animal or if it is an animal farm kind of production. And so that's exactly the first pillar of the work that we do, and we do that with global and local research organizations and governments to inform how much these animals are emitting and what's the actual impact of different technologies or different farming practices, so that we have the information in hand. And we are already well advanced, especially in countries like Austria. We already know most of these questions, so the evidence is already there. But I think the gap is often in awareness, and also we need an MRV for the actual costs and benefits, economic costs and benefits of what we're proposing, because I think that usually science, and again, especially in countries like Austria, it's pretty established in terms of like what's the different emission pattern of different animals with different diets. What it's not so straightforward is how that's communicated in terms of costs. So, and also that's, I think, where policy plays a role, because usually the costs are in the burdens of farmers, and that's not fair. That's what we really should talking about, corporate responsibility. We should also be talking about green products certification, because usually consumers care about this issue. So why don't you make sure that the right regulations are in place so that consumers know if that meat is low emission or if that meat is not low emission. The same thing with traceability here in Pará. Consumers, especially European consumers, they want to know when they buy meat from Brazil if that meat is coming from recently deforested land. You could do that for methane emissions in different cattle. So, and this shouldn't be on the burdens of farmers. This should be on the burdens of meat packers, right? So, but definitely I think that what you said, it's very important, not only about the emissions, but
who is bearing the costs, and what are the benefits of these measures? So thank you very much for your question.
Okay, thank you. Juan Pablo.
I want to thank Karina and thank John, was your name, right? I want to thank both of them for their comments. I want to mention that there's many people working on information so that we do scientific or evidence-based decisions. Today there's an institution who's here in the COP. It's called Carbon Mapper. There are satellites today who are going around space and they can measure methane emissions of all the oil and gas industry, of waste or landfills, even big cattle farms. There is information. This is the first thing I want to say. There's a lot of information. And part of our effort is to make sure that we can get information into members of Parliament's hands so that they can promote the decisions. I'd say that's the most important thing. I want to thank you. And especially members of Parliament, we're supposed to talk, parlamentar. We're supposed to compete in elections, and after the elections, get together and think of the country and get the country going, each of our countries. And there cannot be any topic which is not allowed, especially when climate change is involved. Climate change is not of the right, it's not of the left. Climate change is across the aisle. And if we don't do it across the aisle, we're going to lose. So I thank you for your comment. I think precisely livestock and agriculture is the place where we need to dialogue very much and to bring down myths as if that those who want to reduce methane are against livestock or dairy farms. That is absurd. We need to just get them producing without so many emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. And on this idea of the myths, I believe that is also addressed in the documentation, myths versus science. And also thank you for explaining the derivation or the etymology of parliament as in speaking to each other. You say these words your whole lives and you realize actually that there is something meaningful there. I'd like to open the floor to any other interventions. Please. Yeah. I think please come to the podium and introduce yourself.
Thank you. I spoke earlier to this matter where I proposed that Kenya is in talks with IPU to host a methane conference next year. And there's a lot of misinformation around this space. Now, again, I keep saying we are politicians. So we are change agents. Recently, the government of Kenya had a plan to vaccinate cows against the common diseases. And because of fake news, it went round that this was a Bill Gates project to deal with the methane. And I hope we are mostly politicians here. So the story was, when the cows are given that vaccine, they would not release gas. Now allow me to use very unparliamentary words, that the cows will not fart. And it was a big uproar. It was a big political scandal. And the government had to backtrack. Bill Gates had nothing to do with it. It had nothing to do with methane. It had nothing to do with making cows not release gas. It had everything to do with vaccination. So the methane conversation has been mixed up in lots of conspiracy theories that we have to be extremely careful how we sell it. Many of our voters are pastoralists in Africa, and I think Southern America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Pastoralists are huge political capital, and you don't want to mess with them, and you don't want to do anything that makes them feel like their age-old customs and practices are detrimental to the climate. They will struggle to understand. They will tell you our ancestors did it even before these conversations around climate change came up. So it requires a lot of capacity building. Just the same way carbon cannot be seen and held by hand, as one of the panelists said, that methane is also colorless, it's odorless. It will require a lot of training, first of all from the political classes, for us to be confident and comfortable enough to tell our people that we need to do something about it. Otherwise, in many parts of the world, a methane conversation is seen as an affront on livelihoods. But when it comes to waste, I think that's a low-hanging fruit for most of us as political leaders. It's easier to talk about because a lot of the urban areas are choking in waste, which can be converted into much more useful forms. And so in the event we are able to host in Nairobi, we'll be happy to demystify the Bill Gates conspiracy theories, and we'll look for some low-hanging fruit which members of parliament can use to sell this agenda, which science has proven. And at the end of the day, we go by science. We don't go by feelings. We don't go by short-term political calculations. If science proves that this is a threat, then we have no option but to tackle it head-on. Thank you.
Well said, and again a reminder of this challenge between science versus myth, but science is science. It doesn't care what we think, it does its thing, and so we need to address that. Thank you for the intervention. I'd like to open the floor once more to any other comments. Okay, I also want to thank you for being brave enough to use a technical term for the digestive process in these discussions. Okay, so we will draw this session to a close. Thank you again to all of our speakers and to our participants for this wonderful discussion here. Today's dialogue has reinforced that rapid methane reductions are critical to keeping the 1.5 degrees within reach. I know you might take a different view, but critical nonetheless. And that parliaments have a unique role in ensuring policies are in place, budgets are aligned, and progress is effectively monitored. As we've heard today, methane is our global emergency brake, a lever we can still pull to slow warming in the near term and buy valuable time for deeper, longer-term decarbonization. I urge you to think of methane in that way, an emergency brake that, if pulled decisively, can make a measurable difference within this decade. As we move forward from COP30, we hope that today's exchange will inspire continued parliamentary leadership on methane, delivering solutions that work for the climate, for communities, and for the economies. We have the ability. Let's now tap into the willingness. And this concludes our session. Thank you all.
Convidamos os presentes para um coffee break no foyer do auditório. Dentro de 15 minutos, iniciaremos a 4ª sessão de trabalho. Senhoras e senhores, dentro de 2 minutos iniciaremos a 4ª sessão de trabalho. Senhoras e senhores, neste momento, iniciaremos a 4ª sessão de trabalho, que irá discutir o tema Promovendo a Ação Climática Equitativa, abordagens parlamentares para soluções centradas na saúde e com perspectiva de gênero. Compõe esta mesa a senhora Flávia Bustrou, da Parceria para a Saúde Materna, Neonatal e Infantil e ex-diretora-geral adjunta da OMS para a Saúde da Família, Mulheres e Crianças, e que ficará responsável pela moderação deste painel. E a senhora Julia Bunting, diretora da Divisão de Programas do Fundo de População das Nações Unidas. Com a palavra, a senhora Flávia Bustrou, que irá moderar esta sessão.
Boa tarde, senhoras e senhores.
Ladies and gentlemen.
It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here moderating the final session. I hope the energy is still high because this is going to be a power session. I know we have some wonderful members of parliament here that will come and reinforce this session. And I tell you, one of the most powerful sessions that I was at this week at COP was entitled Women, Climate and Power. Mujer, Clima e Poder. So you get the sense of what we are going to discuss in this session. We really want to address some of the consequences of climate change that often in the conversation, in the climate change debates, in the COP, are marginal. And let me up front thank very much the organizer, the Brazilian Parliament, the Parliament of Pará, to have included a session like this. This is really definitely something that is not often the case, that we have conversation about what's the impact that climate change has on population, on key population, on women. What's the impact that climate change has on health of the population? What's the impact that climate change has on justice for this population? So that's a very, very appreciated. I am very passionate about this topic, especially as during my role as Assistant Director General at the World Health Organization, we really worked and led the work to include in the Paris Agreement the right to health, gender rights, and that was an amazing fight that included a lot of activists and a lot of people with science and a lot of members of parliament that were with us. So to help set the stage and to engage you in this conversation, we are really fortunate that we have Miss Julia Bunting, that is a dear colleague for many years. We have crossed paths in many, we have had different hats. Now, currently, Julia is a director of the program division at United Nations Population Fund, what is known as United Nations UNFPA. And she is here with her team following the negotiation and the work on the issue of population and also on the gender. And the gender action plan that, as you know, is being discussed and negotiated as we speak. There is the gender action plan that was supposed to be finalized by Friday, but there are some opposition to that finalization, and we might need help from you. But Julia helps set the stage, and we get the conversation going. Julia, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Flavia. Excellencies, partners, and colleagues, it is an honor to address this crucial session on equitable climate action. Climate change, as we know, is a major threat multiplier for human health and well-being, and it disproportionately impacts women and adolescent girls. A woman's right to a safe birth or to live free from violence does not disappear in a hurricane, a drought, or a flood. We all know the data, but we must never forget the human stories behind these statistics. The pregnant mother who cannot reach a clinic because the road has flooded. The adolescent girl forced into child marriage because drought has wiped out her family's livelihood. Or the survivor of violence seeking shelter in a compromised facility. Around the world, women and girls are on the front line of this crisis, facing growing health risks, disrupted livelihoods, and threats to their fundamental well-being, dignity, and rights. Parliaments hold the legislative power and budgetary authority necessary to turn global commitments into local reality. As parliamentarians, you are the vital link between policy, finance, and the communities that you represent. To champion equitable climate responses, we urge you to focus on 3 essential mandates. Firstly, climate action must recognise the interlinkages between climate change and human health, particularly women's health. We must ensure that national adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions explicitly treat sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR, and gender-based violence, GBV, prevention as core, life-saving components of climate emergency preparedness and adaptation. This can be achieved by ensuring that climate plans are based on comprehensive vulnerability assessments that integrate SRHR and GBV, and by supporting public consultations for SRH integration into key national climate policies. Secondly, a just transition cannot happen if it sidelines half the population. Parliaments therefore must legislate to promote women's climate leadership and secure decent work opportunities in the green economy. This includes mandating gender-responsive workforce training and ensuring women's access to ownership of land and financial resources. And thirdly, the money must follow the rhetoric. The current finance architecture is failing women. Only 2.3% of climate finance is principally targeted to support gender equality. Parliamentarians can help turn this tide for domestic and multilateral climate financing through your oversight powers to enforce climate budget tracking that includes a gender marker. This helps compel governments to demonstrate with transparent data that climate finance is genuinely reaching women's organisations and funding gender transformative projects. It is critical that budgetary allocation must accompany all SRHR, GBV and other gender-responsive policy integration efforts in NDCs and in NAPs. Finance must recognise and fund the non-economic loss and damage that directly impacts human rights, including the loss of life, the increases in gender-based violence, and the deterioration of sexual and reproductive health. And UNFPA is ready to support you in this work, including with our expertise in connecting human rights with population data. So I'll give you 3 specific areas. Firstly, we provide demographic intelligence, the sex and age disaggregated data to help you identify vulnerability hotspots and ensure that climate policies leave no one behind. For example, our analysis in Latin America and the Caribbean region shows that 40% of the population is exposed to at least one major natural risk, and nearly 5,000 emergency hospitals are located in hazard zones. Demographic intelligence, foresight and analysis must be the foundation of resilient health systems. And we advocate for strengthening, and secondly, we advocate for strengthening the climate resilience of health systems that can provide a complete package of sexual and reproductive health and gender-based violence services, even amidst climate shocks. Our work in South Sudan, for example, where a vulnerability assessment was conducted, showed a 50% increase in gender-based violence in the climate-affected areas. It then went on to provide a clear roadmap, including the deployment of maternity clinics and the building of heat-resistant health clinics. And thirdly, we can assist you directly. Earlier this week, we launched a new policy guidance handbook for integrating sexual and reproductive health, gender-based violence and harmful practice prevention into national climate policies and actions. So this is a tool that is available to you to help make your NDC 3.0s and your national adaptation plan submissions the most inclusive and gender transformative ones yet. And then just yesterday, UNFPA was one of the organisations that endorsed and committed to operationalising the Belém Health Action Plan, a lighthouse public health adaptation. It helps place human rights, dignity and system preparedness at the very heart of climate policy, with explicit mention of sexual and reproductive health and rights and clear gender transformative approaches. So by integrating the human face of climate change, the health, the safety and the choices of women and girls into our surveillance, our decision-making and our response mechanisms, we can truly build health systems that are not just shock responsive, but are climate resilient. As parliamentarians, you have that unique power to deliver on this promise. So we hope that we can work together to ensure that the Gender Action Plan, the Belém Health Action Plan and other key outcomes of this COP30 translate into safe pregnancies and birth, into empowered women and to resilient communities worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Miss Julia. It is, as she said in the conclusion of her remarks, we are really at a tipping point. I can consider that very clearly. Especially, we have, for the first time, the country which is hosting the COP, Brazil, that has taken a specific and direct initiative in developing what is called the Belém Health Action Plan. So this is the first time that this initiative has been taken in the COP30. So for the last 30 COPs, health was not seen as an aspect of the work that was worthy of developing a plan to respond to. And for that reason, really appreciation to the Brazilian government and the Brazilian activists and our dear friend, Dr. Mariangela Simao, the Secretary for Surveillance, who has led that work. Another great woman that has led a great work, recognition to her. But as Julia has said, now the plan is only a tool that identifies areas of work for Parliament to focus on, and then the implementation of that plan is really in the hands of Parliament. And what we really would like to do during this afternoon is to hear more from the people here from the floor in terms of how you have already contributed to this agenda, how you see the interface of women, climate change, and health and gender justice. What are the challenges that you are facing? I alluded earlier in my remarks that as we speak, there is currently a negotiation on the Gender Action Plan. Gender is an area that was recognized 10 years ago already from the COP, from the Conference of Parties, as deserving an action plan. So this is not the first action plan, it's a second, it's a renewal of, but the negotiation around it has met some resistance from countries that are objecting, for example, to the use of the word sexual and reproductive health. So there is where I think the voices of parliaments and parliamentarians and women in Parliament is so crucial and important. So let me open the floor, as we have done in the previous session. We have already a few speakers that have asked the floor, but please, if others would like to take the floor, you're welcome. So let me invite Mr. Alex Sobel from the United Kingdom to be the first one to take the floor. Thank you, sir. Please.
Thanking Humberto Costa, the rapporteur, for the IPU here, COP30. I was the global rapporteur in Glasgow, and thank him for accepting my amendments to the outcomes document, which are pertinent to this session. We talked a lot earlier, or lots of talk about Paris 10 years ago, but whilst Paris was happening, and another environmental event happened much closer to here at Mariana Dam on the 5th of November 2015, when the dam, an iron sidings dam, collapsed. And it didn't collapse by accident, it collapsed because BHP Billington, a British company, failed to have the right safety measures. It directly killed 19 people, and the health effects of the Mariana Dam disaster are felt today, with the longest ever recorded pollutant spread of 668 kilometres, spreading right through that area of Brazil. And that is why it's important that today's outcomes document includes ecocide, because the health effects of ecocide are huge, and it's important that Parliament legislate on ecocide. The other addition to the outcome document is something that also was agreed at the Glasgow COP and then was initiated last year in Baku, and that is Article 6, the use of private finance for nature restoration for carbon credits, voluntary carbon market. We know that the states won't have sufficient finance, particularly in the current global political situation, to ensure that all of the rainforests are protected, nature is protected, indigenous peoples' environments protected, biodiversity habitats are protected. And this finance can be used for this work, and in particular to find work for women who may otherwise be unable to find work in the industries which are associated with deforestation, heavy industries. But this voluntary carbon market, Article 6, can be used to restore the nature, to protect the nature, to employ women and indigenous communities. So I'm thankful to the panel, and I'm thankful to Humberto Costa for accepting these amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, the COP that your government led was also very, very seminal to prompt action on health, because it was really from Glasgow that the conversation on health became very concrete, then the proposal on having a health action days, then a health action coalition, all of that originated there. So thank you for that. I'd like to call to make a contribution Ms. Leila Barros from Brazil.
Muito obrigada a todos por estarem aqui no Brasil. Agradecer a todos os parlamentares e parlamentares que estão aqui conosco.
All the delegations that are here in this COP.
É uma honra poder discursar nessa sessão como representante do Parlamento brasileiro, país anfitrião desta COP, realizada no coração da Amazônia, que é símbolo da esperança e do desafio global que todos nós compartilhamos.
This global challenge that we share, we're living in a climate crisis that is not only environmental, but it's social and of gender also. And women are in the front line of the impacts. They face droughts, floods, and the loss of
e, é claro, a insegurança alimentar.
The loss of their subsidies and food security. We're still minority in the instance that make decisions about our future. This is why our parliamentarian action needs to be really clear and needs to transform. We need to have financing for these policies, these climate policies, and I defend that COP is a milestone to recognize women's role in ecological transition as political leaderships, scientists, agriculturers, and guardians of the traditional knowledge. There is no fair transition without the force and the protagonism of the women's voice. And here I want to do a direct appeal to IPU to get together with this issue and to stay firm in these policies, climate policies. We want IOP to build an agenda that guarantees voice and resources for women in all countries can execute their mission. The climate crisis needs everybody's action, and this action needs to have face, voice, and political leadership. This is our appeal as a women's parliament and as a Brazilian woman.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you so much.
Clearly, a very, very important point you have raised, which is about the leadership role that women have to play in the context of climate change. Yes. So we are very fortunate that we were now joined by another very powerful members of parliament here in Brazil, a Senhora Célia Xacriabá. Forgive me for the accent. She is a member of the Chamber of Deputies here in Brazil. Welcome. Welcome. I'll let you catch your breath and bring you in the conversation in a moment. I'll invite Mr. Shinji Takeuchi to make a comment, and then I give you the floor. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
ご発言の機会をいただきましてありがとうございます。日本の国会代表団団長をしております竹内真二と申します。よろしくお願い申し上げます。
Linking gender issues with climate change or gender issues with responses to disasters caused by climate change is extremely important. That is our awareness. As stated in this agenda, those most severely affected by climate change are people in vulnerable situations such as women and girls. Without including their perspectives, effective measures for climate change and disaster risk reduction cannot be achieved. In Japan, in addressing climate change and other challenges towards realizing a sustainable society, we are promoting efforts from the perspective of gender equality in line with international trends. Specifically, Japan is increasing the appointment of female members to advisory councils on this topic and thereby expanding women's participation in policy and decision-making processes. And we are drawing the experience and lessons from the Great East Japan earthquake that occurred in 2011. And the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030 was adopted at the third UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in 2015. It emphasizes that women, children, persons with disabilities, and indigenous people should be involved as stakeholders in the formulation and implementation of policies, plans, and standards related to disaster risk. As Parliament, we recognize the need to closely monitor whether the government is developing disaster-related policies with such perspectives in mind. However, even in Japan, traditional division of roles still persist, and domestic responsibilities such as child care and nursing care still tend to fall very much disproportionately on women and girls. To change such situation, it is necessary to fundamentally transform the deeply rooted gender norms in the society. And doing so actually requires steady efforts across a wide range of fields. I would very much like to hear the views of other panelists on this topic as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takeuchi. Thank you for putting the accent on disaster risk reduction and how women and children are particularly affected during disasters, and also for really spotlighting how important it is to transform the gender norms that allocate to women particular role, especially in the care. So we come back to our panel and our panelists, and we are really keen to hear from you, Ms. Celia, on this topic of women, health and climate, and especially your perspective as an indigenous member of parliament and as an indigenous woman. I have to say that I have had the pleasure and opportunity to interact with her during this week, and I have appreciated her strength and honesty and also her direct way of speaking. Please.
Nanduan Gria Panki, Nanduan Ruminishana, Guana Saxari, Nantumpangang Tomangi. Dagri, Nishatari Tika, Oikitu, Dagri, Simikran Rikiwa. Eu estou falando de grande chamado global para as mulheres e que o futuro vai ser ancestral ou não será. A chave da solução para o futuro está no grande movimento flecha. Só vai ter soluções adiante
we're only going to have solutions when we have the knowledge to go back a little bit. And we're talking about go back. We're talking about recognize women to repair and comprehend that many times we suffer with our rights violation, and most of the times the solutions are coming from the women. The forest is female, the planet is female, and the economy should be more female. My colleague Benedita, a woman that led the Congress for a long time. Here we have the Senator Leila, and I'm the first indigenous woman that is president of the Women's Committee. And in my territory, we have 12,000 indigenous people. And what took me, a woman, an indigenous woman, to be in this place, considering that 37 leaderships of my people are all men, and they chose me to be in this place. And this is because the pillar of capitalism and predatory economy hasn't been thinking about women. We're always thinking about men. So when we're talking about women's rights, and Leila is going to agree with me, we're having polarization happening in all places, but the only agenda that we manage to dialogue and say that we can't wait is hungry, is in a hurry. So the woman that is under a climate emergency, this person has much more hurry. So when I got in the Brazilian parliament and I went to defend the temporal mark that would change the indigenous territories, they only recognized the areas that were already demarked. And we struggled to defend, and after they took us to the ethic committee, what they now call the devastation law, and once more I'm going to the ethic committee because I'm defending the planet, I'm defending our population, and many people are saying because I'm aggressive. And I would say, what would you do if they took your mother from you, or if they took your son from you? Unfortunately, all the delimitation of indigenous people only was done after killing people of my community. And we're saying that because I'm sure that if they took your son from you, you would defend in an aggressive way also. And when we're inside our National Congress defending our land and defending our planet, this is not just a political agenda for us. This is about existence. We're more than just environmental activists. We're not leaving ourselves. This is why we launched the program. Without women, we don't have the climate. This is a project that is created by many parliamentarians in Brazil, and many countries already protocoled this together. This bill proposes a mapping to measure the violence occasioned in situations of climate crisis. Benedita, no one told us that the Yanomami crisis that sensibilized the whole world, more than 30 girls were raped for exchange of food. Nobody talks about the narcos that happens that are inside our indigenous territories. Nobody says that our men go to have breakfast and their women, they lose their husbands, because women are sustaining culture, are sustaining the territory, are sustaining education, and many times they're also violated. We have a research that says that women that suffered climate violences, they're also suffering effective. They were left. So they went through one more challenge. That when we were in BRICS agenda, we proposed that all countries that are part of BRICS, they could at least give 5% for agendas turned to gender climate. We can't face this type of violence if we don't talk about financing also.
Hoje,
we know
comprovadamente,
today
qual é a ferramenta
it has been
mais
proven
eficaz para uma mulher sair da
that,
situação
do you
de
know
violência?
what has been proven? The best tool that a woman has to leave a situation of violence, she needs to have financial autonomy. No one leaves a situation of violence if there's no financial autonomy. Environmental racism needs to be understood in a perspective of gender. It needs to be understood under a perspective of address. We can have different languages, we can have different religions, we can have different tastes, we can have economical interests that are different also, but the truth is that we share the same planet. We can be ex-congressman of the Legislative Assembly, we can be an ex-minister, we can be an ex-mayor, but we can't have an ex-forest, an ex-Amazon, an ex-Cerrado, ex-Pantanal, because we're not going to be ex-women, we're not going to be an ex-Brazil, we're not going to be an ex-Japan, because we don't want to have an ex-planet. So the gender issue now is to combat the violence against women, and this needs to be a climate agenda urgently as a humanitarian issue.
E é preciso que o parlamento tenha assento na mesa de negociação, porque é preciso
because we need to sensibilize.
Nós realizamos pré-COPs
we had pre-COPs in areas with children, and these children would do letters and send them, and all of them would think of nature as their first mom figure, because women are also the ones that defend this defense space. When we're talking about environments, we're not just talking about the forest, we're also the environment, and people lost the capacity of having land as a reference, because they can build buildings, but they can't respect the forest. So thinking about a health perspective, more than 400%.
O uso de ansiolítico, sonífero, o índice de suicídio. Você sabe qual é o maior jeito de matar uma mulher? Não é somente deixando ela morta, é arrancando o sorriso. E nós
we can live a place where people aren't smiling anymore, because we would have alarms that would ring afraid for another disaster. We had more than 200 people that died in this disaster. And moms would say, I want to bury my kids, because fighting for climate justice is make other moms not going. This is why the kids that participated in pre-COP drawing a dead fish, I'm sure that if she talked to whatever leader in a table of negotiations with any congressman that votes against the environmental agenda, they would think differently, because we need to look towards this with the same view that a children has. Without women, we don't have climate. Without children, we don't have tomorrow. This is why I'm thinking, how can I simplify to tell people, explain the time of nature and the time of the human? The pillars of our National Congress, Juscelino Kubitschek, that thought the architecture of our Congress, he took 3 years to build our Congress. And those pillars have 3 meters of height. Copacabana Palace has 180 meters in Rio de Janeiro. The highest forest in the Amazon is here in Belém do Pará, and it has 600 to 900 years of age. And this is the difference between men and nature. We have things that money can buy. Money is not going to substitute our forest. Our struggle is not
to get sick. All of us are super anxious because we're always struggling against time. The struggle is going to be true when we think about recovering time. We have an important challenge that we need to unheat the planet to heat our hearts, because we know that the forest not only cures, but the forest allows us not to get sick. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Muito obrigada, Ms. Celia. Thank you for your passion, for your commitment, and for the important word that clearly express the leadership quality that women can have in the fight against climate change and in the fight on the consequences of that climate change, as she articulated very, very clearly, the gender-based violence that affects women, that affects children in the domestic area, that often is not spoken of, is not recognized, and that you as Member of Parliament have a very, very important role in protecting in the law, in defending, and in creating environments that are not allowing that violence to happen. We have still sometimes for other contribution from the floor, the interparliamentary union sessions that I have ever participated, they are valuable because they facilitate dialogue. So I really welcome that there are other voices, that any member of parliament that is here, the gentleman here, please, if you go to the stand and introduce yourself. On peut parler français aussi, et il y a la traduction.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis l'honorable Cédric Nguindou, sénateur de la République démocratique.
Thank you. I'm a senator from the Republic Democratic of Congo. I'm the head of the delegation. And with great pleasure that I am here to speak in this panel, because I'd like to insist the presentation by the representative of Japan, because in this area, the education is at the center. I would like to use the example of the Congo, Republic Democratic of Congo. It is in the center of Africa. We have 65% of the water basin. And in this space, in the majority of cases, there is an atrocity that we know with our populations, that women are subject to sterilization, forced sterilization methods in order not to have pressure in the forests, because the demography problem would would increase the pressure on the forests. And some people refuse this vaccination, the sterilization vaccination, because of that, their children at times we exposed some lives instead of insisting on education, that people could preserve the forests better instead of having them sacrificed. In the eastern part of our country, we have a terrible war going on for 30 years, especially because of the women exploitation and
à garder, à garder de l'intelligence dans nos batteries, dans nos téléphones, dans nos smartphones et ordinateurs et tout. Le coltan, le lithium, toutes ces ressources minières qui sont prisées.
In order to have the batteries in computers and other parts, there's a war happening for the minerals. And this has brought extreme violence against women, rapes every 2 minutes. Even children are being raped. You can imagine that ecological transition endangers this generation, and we should insist as a parliamentarian on education issues to allow women to become sovereign and to allow better preservation of the forests. They are already guardians of the forest, so we could use financing to improve education and also in peace matters, a durable peace with solid bases, and not to have a capitalistic about that brings funds and others. This is my contribution. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, le sénateur de RDC. Thank you for putting the spotlight on the value of education and how education, we know that an educated woman is better able to provide for herself, provide for her family, and that is also better able to be economically independent, and that is protection for her in all situations, in situation of climate change, in situation of war, in situation of violence. Thank you for that. Clearly an important policy lever that you as Member of Parliament have. There was another hand there, please, if you can introduce yourself.
I speak in Italian because we have translation. Yes, grazie. Sono Chiara Braga, sono una deputata del Parlamento italiano.
I'm a congresswoman from the Italian
bellissimo panel.
For this wonderful session and for the passionate remarks, very deep. Thank you also for bringing the global health issue in this COP and the connection with climate change. It's essential in the One Health approach that should more and more guide our integrated policies. I will also go back to the request made by the Japanese Parliament about the education training of new skills. I think that the Parliament should work in reinforcing the training of the science and technology disciplines, because the fight against climate change is also done through the technological innovation and a strong connection with science. A lot of times in our country, women, they find difficulty to have access to education in these essential fields. There's a great debate in Italy and Europe to enable and access to this kind of education, this training, to allow that the leadership in many areas, technology, science, and even politics, can have competencies and skills where the data shows that the results and performance of women are even better and more effective. I think that this could also be a territory for joint work between the parliaments that are here, reflecting together about this important aspect and decisive. Because we're not going to become former parliamentarians. We want to be carriers of a value for the defense of our planet.
Grazie, Deputata Braga. And certainly you touched the issue that is very close to my heart. Just to give some data to what you have mentioned, currently in the health sector of the world, women are the workforce. More than 70% of the health workers in our countries in the world are women. In certain professions like midwives and nurses is more than 80%. But the leadership of that sector remain male. And that is certainly something that we need to transform, because you're very right that, for example, when COVID-19 struck the world, we actually saw that the countries that performed the best in their response to COVID-19 were the countries that were led by women, and where women in the health sector were having the leadership. So this is an important nexus that came also in our initial conversation. Women, yes, they are affected by climate change, but also they hold a key for solutions and they hold the key for solution in their agency, in their leadership, including in disciplines like STEM, where women are not traditionally part of, and it links very much with the points that the senator from ADC raised about education. And education of women should not just be focused on the care and the care in the family, but on all the different subjects, including the scientific subjects. Any other comments, any other inputs from any questions to the panelists on this end? The Senator Costa, you were a former Minister of Health. I'm not letting you keep quiet. I'm sorry. I'm bringing you in. You will speak later. That's okay. Understood. So let me come to the panelists. Maybe ask Julia if you have any final comment, any reflection, if you want to answer to any of the comments that were raised from the floor, and then I will come to you for some final comments from you to Ms. Celia.
Thank you, Flavia, and thank you to everybody who's contributed. I echo and agree and support all that has been said by all of you. I think the criticality of thinking about these issues holistically, they are all very interconnected, and the health and the education of women and girls are absolutely central to all of these issues. We talked a bit about issues around violence. My fellow panelists talked about violence. I shared the data that we had from work in South Sudan that had seen violence increase significantly by 50% during times of disaster. That is real. That is the real impact on real people in real places. And these things cannot be siloed. We cannot address health on Monday and deal with education on Tuesday and deal with climate crisis on Wednesday. It is the same populations who are at the highest risk of the worst outcomes across all of these issues. So your role as parliamentarians to bring these issues together, to make sure that we give voice and visibility to the poorest and most marginalized populations and allow them to benefit from in the investments and not to have the challenges of where our systems and processes are failing is absolutely critical. So I applaud all of you for the work that you do every day within your parliaments, for participating in these sorts of conversations, and encourage you to go more and to go further and to go faster. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Some final words from you, Ms. Celia.
Gostaria de agradecer pela oportunidade. Nós que demoramos muito tempo para chegar nesse espaço, e quando nós chegamos nesse espaço, as pessoas falam: vocês estão atrasados, só agora está chegando as mulheres,
black
negras,
women, indigenous women, university professor.
Mesmo estando
Even
no parlamento,
being in the
ano
parliament,
passado,
I
concluí
finished
como a
as the
primeira
first
doutora
doctorate
indígena pela Universidade
indigenous
Federal de
by
Minas
the
Gerais.
University of Minas
E quando
Gerais. And they
falam,
say, you're late,
nós
you're
falamos,
delayed.
não
No, we
estamos
say,
atrasados.
no, we're not
Atrasado foi a
delayed. Delayed
política,
is
foi
the
o
politic,
parlamento
late is the
que demorou
parliament that
tanto
took so
tempo
long
para
to
ter a
have us
nossa
there.
presença.
We
Embora chegamos
arrived
por último,
last,
nós já
but we
temos
have
olhar adiante.
in a
É
head
como
look, a
um
forward look.
movimento
It's like an
flecha,
arrow
só
movement.
sabe
It
chegar
only goes
adiante porque
forward
também nós
because we're
somos
visionaries.
visionários.
And
E
this
essa compreensão
understanding of
dessa
this
sensibilidade, eu falo que a saída da emergência climática, todo mundo aqui veio de voo, levanta a mão. E quando estamos no voo, as pessoas falam: você tem mais de 60 anos, você está gestante, você tem comorbidade, está preparado para sentar na saída de emergência? Todos nós ficamos olhando o celular. Sim, eu nunca parei para olhar a saída de emergência. E a crise climática vai ser uma grande saída de emergência. Nós temos que preparar os filhos, as crianças, para chegar na escola quando o céu estiver coberto de fumaça. Como que as escolas vão estar adaptada. Por isso, na semana seguinte, no Congresso Nacional, provavelmente nós vamos votar o Plano Nacional de Educação para os próximos 10 anos. E pela primeira vez na história, nós estamos contribuindo junto para fazer uma emenda para ter no Plano Nacional de Educação, educação ambiental, educação climática, para que também esteja pautada a questão da mulher dentro do Plano Nacional de Educação. Não existe vacina para enfrentamento à violência, às questões questões ambientais, as questões da mulher. A vacina está na transformação de consciência. E só podemos fazer isso se for por meio da educação. Depois de amanhã nós vamos estar fazendo aqui, junto às comunidades quilombolas, nós somos autores de um projeto de lei que é para reconhecer os territórios indígenas, territórios quilombolas e tradicionais, já como escolas climáticas existentes no Brasil. E um diretor de uma escola na França me procurou dizendo que tem interesse que a França fosse o primeiro país que tivesse escola do clima. Mas, na verdade, nós já temos as escolas climáticas, Benedita. Eu estudei minha primeira e segunda série no território indígena, debaixo de um pé de árvore. Sabe qual é a escola mais forte? É aquela que estuda observando o conhecimento da terra. Aonde está a escola? Aonde está a universidade? A universidade, a escola está dentro de nós. Portanto, ela está em muitos lugares. Por isso que pensar em proteger aqui que estamos falando da COP na Amazônia, todo mundo fica parecendo que é um amor abstrato. Você não cuida daquilo que você não conhece. É por isso que é preciso conhecer, colocar os pés nesse lugar. A Amazônia não é somente o coração do mundo. A Amazônia não é somente um bioma. A Amazônia é uma tecnologia. E a Amazônia também é mulher. E por isso, quando nós falamos de mulheres que estão aqui em Munduruku, mulheres Caiapó, mulheres do povo Guarani Kaiowá, já estão com o útero contaminado e tendo má formação também por mercúrio. E por isso saiu numa revista científica internacional que 40% das mulheres já estão pensando em não ter mais filhos, com receio de nascer com má formação. E por isso nós sabemos a importância de pensar esse lugar do financiamento, porque nós queremos não sobreviver a um planeta, nós queremos viver com alegria. E tem muita gente que fica pesquisando forma de vida em outro planeta. Eu falo, gente, a Terra é um lugar bom para se viver. Quem não cuida do que tem não vai cuidar do que vai ter. Ainda dá tempo e a hora é agora. Por isso, quando eu perguntei minha tia de 90 anos, que ela foi parteira de mais de 2.000 crianças no território, eu falei, tia, a senhora é cientista? Ela falou, não, Deus me livre de ser cientista. Eu falei, por que a senhora sabe virar criança ainda no útero da mãe se for uma gravidez de risco? Ela falou, porque eu sou ciençosa. E eu penso que as mulheres são uma grande ciensosa do século XXI. Eu falei, o que é ciençosa? Ela falou, é uma ciência que a gente não vai na escola, mas é uma ciência que nasce de dentro e que vem na sabedoria da terra. Por fim, inspirada Nielza Soares, ela diz que nós somos mulheres do fim do mundo. E eu digo que com o nosso trabalho nós podemos evitar o fim da humanidade.
Thank you very much. Obrigada, Miss Cilia, and thank you so much, Miss Julia. It's very clear, dear colleagues, dear members of Parliament, that from our discussion, from our conversation, that effective climate action must be inclusive. We have used this word many times. It must address reducing emission. Yes, that's the primary target, but it also must protect health of population from the infectious diseases that rise with the climate change, from the contamination of water, from the sanitation that is missing, from the waste, as we have discussed in the previous panel. It also must advance gender equity. And we had a lot of discussion on these aspects, on protecting women from violence, providing education and inclusive leadership, where women can be at the same time the agent of change that can address climate change, and as Ms. Cilia has put it, they are the science that can address the climate change. And by being inclusive, the response to climate change makes sure that no one is left behind. So we conclude our afternoon session with my special thanks to the Interparliamentary Union, to Mr. Martin Chukung, to the colleagues from the Secretariat that are here, that have invited us to have this conversation. As I said, it's truly appreciated that we can have this space and this time for a truly inclusive conversation. Thank you, muito obrigada de estar aqui ao Brasil.
Informamos a todas e todos que, em função de manifestação pacífica em frente à Assembleia Legislativa do Estado do Pará, a saída do prédio será feita pela área do restaurante. Mas dentro de instantes teremos o encerramento oficial desta reunião parlamentar.
Ladies and gentlemen, in a few moments we're going to have the official closing of this meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
Tem início a solenidade de encerramento da reunião parlamentar da 30ª Conferência das Nações Unidas sobre Mudanças Climáticas. A realização desta reunião
This meeting is an important milestone facing climate changes. Parliamentaries from all over the world got together to trace the path that we need to follow beyond facing this challenge. Senator Humberto Costa
da 30ª Conferência das Nações Unidas sobre Mudanças Climáticas. E o senhor deputado
and Mr. Congressman Cláudio Cajado, member of the Executive Committee of IPU. With the floor, Senator.
Digno e competente relator que irá apresentar dentro de
We will present in a few moments the report about the discussion that were started and finished in this meeting,
onde nós todos iremos
where all of us are going to discuss and approve. I have no doubts that this work will reflect the worries, critics, and suggestions that were exposed here today. For all of us that participated since this morning in this session, and I wish that we can go back to our parliament and present individually and in a collective way what we're going to approve. The climate issue is urgent. Sessions like this one and all parliaments that integrate our institution interparliament It has a fundamental importance that we put in practice. It's essential for us to go back to our countries and propose the need for us to apply what we approve here through the dialogue, through conversations, and through projects that can put in practice what we're discussing here. There are no doubts that everybody that is here and the ones that couldn't be here but are going to see through media, especially in the images that we're going to transmit to the rest of the world, seeing this beautiful forest and powerful forest that is the Amazon forest with this big river that is the Amazon River. I'm sure it's going to touch everybody's hearts. Take this Brazilian message to all countries. We're doing our part, and all of us together are going to continue acting to save our planet and making the Paris Treaty be implemented. Thank you for your participation, and I hope that everybody can continue giving your best in search for a better country and a better world. Thank you so much. This moment, we will hear the pronouncement of Mr. Senator Humberto Costa. Mr. Congressman Cláudio Cajado, our companion in this event,
prezados e prezadas integrantes
dear
do Parlamento de todo mundo, senhoras e senhores.
Parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, in the context of the 13th conference for the Convention of the UN about climate changes in Belém, guided by the principles of UNFCCC and the Paris Treaty, we present our final document. In this document, we recognize the consultative idea of the International Court of Justice, and we represent that we're going through an existential threat. We're going through extreme climate events,
infraestrutura, sistemas
going through energy, food problems, and we emphasize that this is a way that we promote inclusion and struggle against inequality. We highlight the increasing complexity of climate challenges and the big levels of investment that are needed for the mitigation and adaptation. We also highlight the need for a fair transition and inclusive for renewable energy with a gradual reduction of emissions and fossil fuel and methane. We also highlight the vulnerability of groups and communities, what makes the adaptation to be prioritized. Considering this, we invite the parliamentarians to implement legislations that are according to the national plans of adaptation, communications of adaptations, and NDCs. This will support your governance with legislative tools and effective solutions. We defend a better budget, monitoring of mitigation goals, and we hope that the countries in development fulfill their commitments. We support the presidents of COP30 through a collective effort to revert the climate crisis, listening and learning with the indigenous communities and local communities. we invite the developed countries to commit with their climate commitments that are established in COP29 and guarantee that the countries in development, the developing countries, can have access to a fund of loss and damage. We give incentives to the expansion of climate financing and the consideration of climate risks in decision-making, as well as the strengthening of development banks to support the energy transition and sustainable practices. We highlight the importance of research and innovation and AI, focused on the global challenges and the integration of climate policies, environmental policies, and health policies. We reinforce the need to combine strategies and adaptations and risk management and prioritize the attention of groups that are affected unproportionally. We want to combat the climate misinformation. We invite the parliaments to invest in the energy transition, to support the improves until 2030 and accelerate the migration for clean systems, reduce inefficient subsidies for fossil fuel, and expand the use of sustainable fuel, respecting the national differences. Besides that, we request for the development of structures and reduce the methane emissions, oversee the water management policies, prioritize securing our forests and critical areas of biodiversity. We also need to reinforce programs that guarantee the territorial rights of the indigenous communities and local communities. We give incentives for regulatory advances towards neutralization of deforestation and agriculture with low emissions, as well as improvements in the pricing carbon systems and results that guarantee economic security, judicial security, and give incentives for native vegetation. We also give incentives for the development of judicial infrastructures that can deal with environmental damage and armed conflicts, including recognizing the eco-crime as an international crime. We reaffirm the need of public participation, the access to information and justice, and the protection of our environment. To finish, we give incentives to IPU to strengthen the role of parliaments in climate governance and expand international cooperation. We thank the Brazilian government, the Legislative Assembly of Pará, the Chamber of Deputies, and the Federal Senate for hosting this global meeting in a moment where the joint mobilization is essential to face the climate crisis and its impacts. Thank you to all.
This moment, the meeting is finished of the 13th Conference of UN about climate changes. We thank everybody's presence, and we invite all of you for a reception of the Legislative Assembly of Pará, where we're going to offer a closing cocktail.